Good to go?
Yep.
Okay.
We are recording audio, video.
Welcome to the March 11th meeting of the Civilian Review Acting Chair, not permanent chair. So I look forward to the day when I am not, which hopefully will be next month when Jose or Carolyn will return. I would like to first read a land acknowledgement. That since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. Today's land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Iligi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across these lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. With that, we do have a quorum, right? This is the number that we need for a quorum, so we can move forward in our agenda. Does anybody have any proposed changes or anything to our agenda or materials that we have? We have in front of us an agenda, which you have also, Brittany, is that right? Oh, you saw it, well, great. And I think something for our training later down the line, printout. Oh yeah, great. And in our packets that we got via email, we had minutes sent to us, so does anyone have any proposed changes to minutes, or should we call for minutes to be approved?
Those changes for me.
Okay, someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes from
I
last
move
month?
to approve
Great.
last month's minutes.
Great. No discussion, any discussion? Okay, who, all in favor of approving the minutes from February's meeting? Aye, 4 of us, great. No opposed, no abstaining. Great, so let us have some comments from board members and commission liaisons. That's our next agenda item. I was just, because it's on my mind, I will go first, if that's okay, because I have a comment just from the police commission last month, which was a virtual meeting due to snow, which is surprising to all of us, but we ended up having a virtual meeting, and acting in capacity chief, Assistant Chief Burke, he's a captain though, right?
Captain.
So AIC in that time period, Burke introduced himself, and he's newer to the police department, is that right? Yeah. I'm looking over here because Mark was there also, so I need to gut check myself. And we talked about 2 policies that are of interest probably at some point to this committee. One is the drone policy, and it's interesting to note that City of Eugene Police Department is very advanced in this regard. I think nationwide, sort of leading the charge in drone usage for police forces. And I am not the expert in the room, we could probably talk more about this, but it is a policy that we are helping to review from the community standpoint, but also with a lot of expertise from the department itself. It's trying to sort of be at the forefront of drone policy usage. In my understanding, just as a community member, but also as a police commission liaison, it seems like the police department is doing very appropriate, taking into account very serious concerns about drone usage and surveillance, and trying to incorporate that into policy, and instead using it for the purposes that we as a community, I think, would hope for the police department to use it for. But if you have questions about that, the minutes from the police commission are a public document, I think. And so you could peruse through those if you'd like. There are also recordings of the meetings that you could look at. The second policy that we reviewed was welfare checks. And it was a briefer conversation, partially because it's a shorter policy. And Commissioner Rady, who's on the police commission, moved to approve those, the the policy as it was written at the time, and we all felt like the current policy for welfare checks was, relevant to the work that police need to do and to the sort of community expectations for a policy related to that question. But if you have an interest in that policy, we can talk more about it. So that was my update from Police Commission. Would you like to go?
Yes, so on Thursday, I believe Rick and I will be attending the panel for what is it? What is it called? We're interviewing potential auditors. So I want to let folks know that I was doing that and also ask if anyone had anything that's on their minds that they wanted mentioned. You don't have to say it now, you can send me an email. Yeah, that's something I'll be doing this Thursday, so if anybody has any thoughts on what we should talk about, I'm open. And that's
I don't think any comments necessarily related to this, but I'll plug anyways, if anyone is interested in a legal thing. Tomorrow at noon at the courthouse, Rudy Tachikawa is doing a presentation on federal sentencing, if you just wanna scratch the law itch. I thought I'd plug it for the public to cover yourself, and I think that's it.
Great.
Rick is here.
Oh, Rick. Hello, Rick. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
I have no comments. I did sign up to attend the meeting with Monique, and I will be there if I get away. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, and thank you so much to both Monique and to Rick for participating in that. Yeah, I would have loved to have been there, but I will be out of town. So thank you for doing that. And yes, ask the important questions that are relevant to this board. I think you two have perspective that is not generally held across the community. And so you can at least, I don't know what your interaction will, like how interactive it will be, or whether you will just be reviewing material and sort of providing evaluations. But if you have opportunities to bring this perspective to that conversation, that would be great. Well, without further ado, we have a training topic. We're a little early, so hopefully that is okay. And everybody, I don't know who is doing this
it's
training.
totally allowable. Cindy.
Oh, great.
Coleman,
Okay.
professional
So
standards.
Cindy, do you want to come to the table? That would be great. We get you a little bit longer to give us a training on this important topic. For those that don't understand that comment, Cindy will be retiring, and we are sad to see her go because it has been helpful to have her perspective on the board.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. And just some background, my name is Cindy Coleman. I'm the Professional Standards Manager at the Police Department. I will be retiring March 28th, so I'm looking forward to that. But I've been in internal affairs for 24 years and with the department for a total of 30. So I've been asked to come today to give you an orientation of the case notebook that you would review when you review an IA case. And it's very similar to what you see, but I thought I'd go through the notebook and explain where you're typically going to be able to find certain kinds of documents. So you
Just before you go on,
yes.
can I just mention?
Yes.
I asked for this because I have been on the board. I think did we come on the same?
No, I think
No,
you've been
I've been on
longer.
longer than you. So I've been on longer. So the four of us here, Rick has been on the board a little bit longer. But I still sometimes find it hard to navigate through all of the materials. And so one question that I had is, can we have an orientation again? Because I think you gave us a similar orientation a few years ago, or somehow that happened. But
Staff
also,
might have, I'm not
yeah, maybe you guys did. But there's also sort of questions about that I have that will come up later, maybe about
Okay.
like helping us navigate what are the sequence of things that could be helpful to look at first, where you find certain kinds of information.
Sure.
Thank you for doing the general, and then hopefully there will
Yeah.
be some questions. just
Absolutely.
In your experience.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say, you probably heard about the infamous blue folder. The folks in the department definitely have heard about the blue folder, and it gets its name historically because we put the files in a blue folder. So that's the blue folder they're talking about, a formal IA investigation that's assigned to one of the IA sergeants for a full investigation, working with the auditor's office. So we assign every case a number, IA, and the year in which we received the case. and then a sequential number. And then we put if it's an internally identified complaint here, or if it's the complainant's last name here, if it's an external citizen complaint. And then in every folder for our investigators, we have an internal affairs investigative checklist that they don't necessarily fill out every time, but they have as a resource for them as they're going through a case to determine which investigative steps might be appropriate for them to look at for the specific case they're looking on. So this is probably not part of the folder that you get, but it's something that we have in the folder for their use and reference point. And then we have the internal affairs cover sheet. This was designed just to have a central place where no matter where the investigation is in the chain of command or through whether it's an investigative phase, the adjudication phase, or the discipline phase, we can update this front page as it's going through the different phases. So it is when a case is closed, we can have one real quick place to look and get some information. The iPro report or intake tab, this is where you're gonna see the internal affairs iPro report. It's generated from the iPro database based on the information that we fill in on a case-by-case basis. You may notice when you're looking at these, there might be more than one version of this. There may be an initial version, and there might be subsequent versions, and then there's going to be the final version when it's all completed. That's going to have more information related to when the investigation was completed as it's going through the stages. So if you see more than one version, that's normal, but the very top one should be the most current or the latest. In other words, they should be added within this tab. You're going to see the most recent first, and then the original. The next tab is correspondence. And that's what it says. So it's internal correspondence that could, from the beginning of the case into the end of the case. And again, this is going to be the most current is going to be on top. So when you're looking through it, the oldest correspondence or the initial correspondence is going to be at the very back with the most current on top. And that's typically where you're going to find communication between investigators, chain of command, the auditor's office. Not every piece of every email ends up in the file, but all the key documentation that describes decisions made and how the case is moving through the chain of command should likely be in here. Extensions that are granted for deadlines should be in here. This is where you can kind of hopefully tell the story of what went on in the case. So if you're looking for correspondence, it's generally going to be in the correspondence tab. There could be some exceptions, but mostly it's going to be there. Investigative report. This is going to be the investigative report prepared by the internal affairs sergeant that that goes through the case from identifying who the complainant is, the involved officers, the witness officers, and the investigative steps that they've taken for that particular case. And it will reference the attachments that are part of that investigation. And I'll get back to those attachments in a minute. But the core investigative report is under the investigative report tab. The adjudication tab is all the different memos through the chain of command, including the auditor's office memo that they submit, will be under that adjudication tab. And again, you're most likely or should be finding those in order of with the most current on top. So it's building upwards or backwards. So, and that should also be when if would include, so the sergeant's adjudication recommendation. If anyone in the chain of command also submitted a memo, that would be in there. And then the auditor's office memo would be there. And you could also find the memo to the employee by the sergeant notifying them of what the adjudication was. That should all be in that adjudication tab. And that takes us to our next phase, which is discipline. So if any of the allegations in the case were sustained, we're gonna find information in the discipline tab. If they weren't, there's not gonna be anything in that tab for you that would be relevant. Same organizational order where you'll have the most recent memo at the top, working backwards for all the memos that were added related to discipline. So the very most recent memo in a closed case would be the discipline memo that was actually issued to the employee. Would be oh, you guys don't get
I was-
discipline.
Those are,
I mean-
I
Sorry.
was gonna say that, so for your purposes, those
Yes.
are redacted out, so that.
Of course.
That part of the file is not
You don't
there.
see there.
It exists.
Of
We
It
don't
is
see
there, you just.
It
don't
is
see
there, so and that's where everything would be, and my mistake, you guys, on purpose, have those redacted from your view. So that's the core of the investigation, adjudication, and discipline. And then we go into all the supporting documents. So we have, if there's a related police report to the investigation, so not all investigations are tied specifically to an event that happened in the field. We could have things, certain circumstances where we have an allegation against someone where there's not a associated police report. But if there is one, they would be under the police report tab. And then the next is the 911 or call or CAD. And so you're probably familiar with an event report or a CAD report. They're the same thing. They're called, they're referenced in both ways. And again, that would be under that tab. And then the other. This is where I would imagine there might be some confusion for you about what you might find there, but it truly is, it is kind of a catch-all. One of the things you're gonna find there routinely is a Garrity warning that the sergeants will have the involved employees or the witness employees sign. That is, should be in the other tab routinely. There could be, it's totally dependent on the case and the investigation, what other things could be in the other tab. You might find supplemental investigative documents there. So for example, if there was a piece of evidence that was secured maybe from a different agency or a different source, there you might find correspondence related to that investigative material in the other tab with those documents rather than in the correspondence tab. So I have seen them organized a couple of different ways. So it could either be in the other or potentially in the correspondence, but typically it's in the other if it's supplemental investigative material.
So Cindy, if there was an internal request for, or as part of the investigation to do something like a defensive tactics review,
Right.
that would typically be in the others tab, or like, would it be, it would be referred to in the investigative report, and then the document itself would be in the other tab? Or
Generally, it should be in the other tab, but
Okay.
I have seen it in the correspondence section. That's why I want to say this. If you're not finding it under the other, it could be buried in the correspondence tab. But typically, I would consider that to be supplemental investigative material that is being taken into consideration rather than routine correspondence. So I would encourage the investigators to put it in the other tab. Photos, some cases have photos that are relevant to the case and others don't, but if there are any, you're gonna find it into the photos tab. And then POM, which stands for Police Operations Manual. What we do on a case is at intake, once the allegations have been identified, we will for reference for the investigator and for the chain of command, pull out portions of our POM that are specifically cited in that case. So it's an easy reference for them of the version of the policy that was in effect at the time that the behavior happened. Because that happens from time to time where we have a complaint from January, and now it's March. And we've changed our policy in February where we need to make sure that we're holding the employee accountable for the policy that was in effect at the time. So we'll make sure and pull the relevant policy and have it in the file as part of the file. So anybody looking at it is making sure they know which policy is being applied to that case when you're doing your analysis for the adjudication. Every notebook that's standard in our reference material, do you provide this part too?
I don't know.
Okay,
It's a good question, but probably.
There will be a lot of questions
Yeah.
about this.
okay.
So you should continue and then
Okay.
I have,
So for the investigators and for the chain of command, what they have for sure with them in every case are reference materials, which include a copy of our personnel complaint process. Which is pretty comprehensive because it has incorporated everything from things that are in the contract to the ordinance to the bargain protocols is all, we're trying to capture it all here. So everybody has a reference point for how we do our business. So that's in there. General categories of complaints is in every folder for chain of command to look at. And those are just general conformance to laws, courtesy, conduct, performance, constitutional rights and use of force, just general categories that we use and think about based on different alleged behaviors, and we can kind of point as to, well, where does that fit? And the auditor's office does that at intake when they're creating the allegations language. The next thing we have in each folder, so we don't know when a case comes in, whether it's gonna have any sustained elements, but we put in the notebook for all of our chain of command a reference to our performance management and discipline terms. This just helps remind them of the different levels of discipline that are available, that they have the responsibility to identify what they're going to recommend forward to the chief. And I'll go over them just really quickly for you. So we have two that are considered non-disciplinary. They're pre-discipline, they're coaching and documented counseling. Those are corrective actions that can be taken for related to an IA case. Although coachings are typically not, those are usually associated with the routine performance feedback that a supervisor gives an employee and generally not associated with a formal IA. Usually the first level they would consider would be a documented counseling. And then the first step in the discipline process is an oral reprimand. And the second step in the discipline process is a written reprimand, but they're no different. They're both in writing. They're both signed by the employee and put in their personnel file. It's really step one and step two. They are, oral reprimand is the first though, usually in the disciplinary process. After a written reprimand, we get into the due process levels of discipline, which are things like suspension, termination, potentially promotion if we're looking at supervisory employee. A demotion might be an option rather than a suspension or termination. But what those levels of discipline are is they're taking away a property right, an economic sanction. In other words, if we suspend someone without pay, that's an economic sanction to them. And there's some additional steps that are required in the processing of that level of discipline. The next thing we have in here is just a list of the investigative types and associated classifications that, again, that's what you see the auditor's office is doing when they're sending things over, is they're classifying those complaints. And this just is more of an information to our staff about what that looks like and what the sub classifications look like. The next thing we have in our notebooks, and this is important, it's the adjudication definitions that you all are probably pretty familiar with. Because this is what you're talking about, every case when you're taking a look at what the auditor's office and the chain of command and the chief ultimately makes the decision on. This is what, definition of what each of those are. Would you like me to go over them or today?
And we have a paper copy.
Very
of
good,
That description.
very good.
If you want to look at it.
Then this again, not sure if you guys have it in your packets. It's really more of an internal document for us, but it's case level dispositions. It's just for each investigative type. These are the dispositions that are available to choose from in IA Pro of how we dispose them out. And it's not just allegations of misconduct. We have lost property, use of force, things like that as well. This is a IA quick reference guide for internal affairs investigations. This was designed as a cheat sheet, if you will, for supervisors, because sometimes our supervisors, they might not see, they might have one IA investigation that comes across their desk a year or 2 years. And so this was designed as a cheat sheet for them to understand as they interface with this process, kind of what their responsibilities are. Recordings. So for our investigators, we have all the hard copy documentation for the investigation is in the folder, but then we also include in digital form a thumb drive for our investigators and the chain of command, all of the evidence that we have that's digital. So that's everything from the recorded interviews, photographs, body worn video, in-car video. We could have surveillance video. We could have video from the jail, Sallyport. Really any evidence that we have in a digital form, we include in the file on a thumb drive. So it's supporting the investigation. We also have in the folders a truthfulness admonishment that the sergeants provide to each employee that before they interview them in preparation for the interview. So that's in a nutshell what's in the file and where you would most likely find it. I think I just open it for questions because I'm not sure what else you might
Yeah, great.
have interest in.
Well, I have a lot of questions, so I will cede the floor to anybody else who has questions to start. Shall I start? Rick, is it okay if I start with some questions? You're good? Okay, so we do not receive a physical notebook.
You no longer receive physical.
Right, this was something in the past.
Correct.
And so what I am curious about is the organization that Cindy described is not an organization that we see where there are tabs.
There's not tabs,
Yeah.
but the order that she described
Yeah.
is the way, as you venture through the file, it is
So-
in the exact same. order.
Okay, so there's one final file. Is that the document that I should be referring to?
Yeah, so when it has the cover sheet and you open up and everything falls underneath that in the same order that she described. We have tried experimenting with putting the elements in different folders for you as if they were tabbed to go through the PDF.
I
Mhm.
have a question.
Yeah.
When we send it to you, we should be sending the PDF to you with the bookmarks on there that match
They,
these.
they do,
Okay,
and that's what we send, but
Okay.
not, those aren't, some people have found the bookmarking not as obvious as maybe putting
Okay.
them in separate files. So we tried that, but then that was confusing for
Okay.
other reasons. So open to feedback on how to make it as seamless as possible. And we
Yeah.
can't provide physical, we have had members request physical copies.
Yes, I
And
remember.
we are welcome, we are happy to accommodate if that's helpful. It just creates a different kind of, we have to check them out to you and check them back in and,
Yeah,
slightly different procedure. But yeah, it's a super good question. They are in the same order that she just described.
okay, so we have, and So I did not know this, so I will explain my understanding. So there are many documents that we receive digitally in multiple folders, and in one of those documents is called final file. And it's listed with the name of the investigation.
It should be, pardon
and
me,
so
it
that
should
is
be a
the thing.
representation of this.
Totally.
Okay,
So what I have never done is downloaded that and used bookmarks, because I
Okay.
did not know that that is a way that you could organize things. So what you could do is download it and use bookmarks, because I don't think you can use bookmarks
Just when
on
you're
the digital,
viewing.
in the, however this is organized, OneDrive drive that we access.
I
That
know
might-
that, sorry, and.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes Amanda will upload certain things that aren't downloadable because we
Sure.
want to preserve, so just.
Mm,
So maybe one thing for us to check is like, can you
Interesting.
use bookmarks within the software that we are, because I've never tried to download it, so I don't know if you can. That is something that I would want to know, because it would be helpful for me to like be able to go to sections.
Yeah.
That is one question that I've been having, is like, how can I
Absolutely.
find the
Sure.
section of material that you've sort of described? Another thing that would be helpful is like an organizational table of contents that just describes the series of the tabs essentially that are a part of that, so that you know what the bookmarks are down the line.
And then even if you couldn't access the bookmarks, you'd have.
A page number,
numbers. Yeah,
sure.
sure,
Yeah.
yeah, that's easy.
So that's really helpful. Maybe I'll. Well, okay, so that is in a folder that we have called final file. So I guess I'm curious about why there is so much additional information, like in the IA report folder, which we have, is all of the information that is in an IA report folder that we have digitally also contained in the final file.
Yes,
So essentially, we could just have the final file
yes.
and find, for example, the IA report information.
Some members have requested that we pull out the kind of key documents that they look
I
at
see.
the most.
Okay,
So that they
yeah.
don't have to slog through the final file
Sure,
to find it.
Sure,
And so we pulled out those elements.
I see.
But
This
yes,
is-
the final
yeah.
file is the absolute, all the things. If
Yeah.
you want to read through all the things, for example, correspondence is something that a lot of people kind of skip over.
Yeah, I have questions about.
But yeah, but like,
Yeah, yeah.
and there can be really useful things there,
Yeah.
but sometimes people don't want to look at that and they just want to look at like the kind of certain pieces. So that is a great. question.
So I guess maybe the better question, another question would be,
Yeah.
which, okay, so it's very easy to understand body worn video, which is a folder we have, and sometimes we have other videos. That is not gonna be readable in the final file. So that is a separate thing that we have access to, just like the thumb drive.
Mhm.
But are all of the other folders that we have access to, which change month to month. So right now it's adjudication memos, final file, IA report, and interviews. All of those are just, aside from the final file, being information that's pulled from the final file to organize it for people who want to go directly to that thing.
Yep.
Great. Good.
No.
Or yeah, or like the more direct access to the specific thing that a board member might want to review.
Correct.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that. I don't know if you all have a problem with that, or if you all understood this and I'm just getting the memo now.
Very validating.
Okay, okay, good, good. So what I have understood, like I typically have gone to the final file first, but then it's somewhat non-navigable because of the lack of understanding that there are bookmarks that may or may not be accessible. We don't know yet
Mhm.
on the digital file. And so I have also been going, like, I've been reading through that, which is a very long, you know, if you're flipping through every single page of an actual investigation, which has a lot more paper than that would have.
Oh,
It takes, you know, it's sort of like page after page of not knowing really where
Where
things
you
start
are.
and end. So I understand why some board members might want to have the things broken out, and I don't have a problem with that. And I don't know if it confuses anyone to have those two things. So within the final file, and we don't have pulled out communication, or what is it?
Correspondence.
Correspondence. That's not pulled out in this particular one. It may have been in previous
I
ones.
don't think that it typically has been something that has been requested.
Yeah, I think the challenge that I have with correspondence, and this, I don't know where this sort of editing would exist, but there are many emails that have portions of other emails within them. And as someone who has worked, for a public agency and like done, records request responses. Like the thing to do is like provide all the information to be really like, you can have everything. That's the thing we have to do for information sharing. But as a reviewer of that, it is impossible to understand what the chain of conversation is and which of the other versions of that email are important to navigate to. If you want to find information about, for example, the process of tracking a complaint, like we're supposed to be reviewing, I find it very difficult, that section of the report, to be a volunteer who is able to access the information that I might want to see. If I had a full-time job, like I understand the investigators probably do that, and they are making sure they capture all the information, but that would just take so much time. I don't think it's feasible for us, or it's not feasible for me to do that. So that is an area where I think some way of refining that information would help us do our job better. And I don't know how that would work. If there's one email that captures the entire chain, and that is the only email that we see, and there are multiple different chains of conversations, but that has been I would say, a challenge for me. It's nice that we have all the information for transparency, but it is hard to read. And then the complaint synopsis, what did I want to ask about that? Complaint synopsis, maybe, oh, it is this. I also, one of the things we try and understand, I think, as a board, is how the complaint was derived and then how it's processed. And, there are ways that we have been able to understand that, but to varying degrees, depending on the material that we review. So I think back to the example of a case where there was a sergeant who saw something concerning, but didn't report it because they didn't feel like it was, worth an investigation, but it was, maybe something that you would just handle as a manager. But then a DA saw the issue and actually did want to report it for a variety of reasons. And then I think that's who ended up starting the complaint with it. And then it was, routed through this office. And some synopsis of that process for each case would be helpful, rather than sort of tracking down the pieces via email, or
So like an intake synopsis?
like how did
Yeah.
how did this meander to become a case that we are looking at?
Right.
Absolutely. And you're right, sometimes it's really straightforward.
Yes, sometimes you get a citizen complaint
Citizen
and
A
you, yeah,
complained,
totally, yeah.
complaint open, but you're
Yeah.
right, sometimes it does kind of go through a circuitous route.
Yeah, and it's always
And
like,
it's
it's very
there, but
interesting.
you're right, you have to kind of
You
dig
have to
through.
pull it out.
Yeah, okay.
Well, there is something that I could offer too, and I have tried to do this with the sergeants, is encourage them to tell the story. Because sometimes a case comes in and it's initially classified as an incident review, and then it's reclassified, and there's different steps along the way. And I have encouraged them in the investigative report to, in that very beginning introduction, sort of tell the story of how we got there. I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what you're asking. How
Yeah.
did this come in? And
Yeah,
maybe
and-
tell the story of if it did have different classifications along the way or something like that, to kind of capture that there. So I think
Totally.
that's very valid and useful for all of us. And I think it could be in the investigative report.
Absolutely. And I'm like, I need the crib notes, like I'm the sergeant at the end who doesn't do a lot of these things. And so I think like even just a version, that is great if it's in the narrative of the investigation. And if there's like literally bullet points of sergeant saw concerning behavior. So for the one I'm thinking of, sergeant saw concerning behavior, but didn't report it because X. DA saw the same concerning behavior, did report it because it impacted their their case. It went to either IA or to, so knowing the sort of progression, I think that could be captured in narrative form or some simpler form for us as people who do this in a different capacity.
It would be, I think it'd be valuable for any audience that
Sure,
looks at a
yeah,
file.
yeah.
Including it could, it could be looked at in other venues as well. So I think
Totally.
that would be useful to tell that story. And so we can, I'll make a note to talk to the sergeants to remind them to make sure and incorporate that into their investigative report.
Great, yeah, and we have seen that, I think, probably at
Yeah.
the sort of,
That's-
IA has done that sort of thing. I've read through and
We've-
that. includes
That's
that.
the goal, is to try to tell the story, because not all cases are straightforward. They can, sometimes I'll have to remind myself, now, how did we get this one?
Yeah,
Was was this flagged by chain of command in the blue team review when they're looking
Right.
at a use of force? And so, that is helpful, I think, for everyone to have that in one spot. And to me, that's where it makes the most sense.
Great.
To do it.
Okay, and then we don't see discipline. That was my other question. Do we see discipline? Do we see the performance management and discipline terms? Is that a public
We
facing document?
haven't
It's on
given
the-
them to you because it's not something that you
We'll evaluate it. Yeah.
evaluate, but it's.
They are published,
It's a policy that's published, sort of.
well, the annual reports that, I prepare for the department, the professional standards annual reports, they are, attachments
Okay.
to the annual report
Yeah.
every year.
So
they're
if a
out
board
there.
member is interested in that. they can
Absolutely,
look at the annual
yeah.
reports.
And, we could also provide them to the auditor's office so they could share them with you. There's no problem with doing that too, if you.
Sure, yeah.
Sure.
I'll wait until maybe a board member requests that.
Okay.
And then. I think that is the extent of my questions and sort of commentary about how maybe it could be improved. I think the biggest thing is understanding the organization of that becomes one file for us that we can navigate through. hopefully.
And I wasn't aware, like maybe it's a software thing, that because we set it up with the bookmarks and we do, so then we do have the table of contents, so we can. On our PDF, we can just hit
Right.
them and just pop exactly where we wanna go.
We can too. It makes me wonder if people external to the city using the OneDrive just have different functionality. So we'll need
Has
to
anyone
do
used
some
bookmarks
testing.
just to test that question? Like in these files?
So I think I opened it, saw how crazy it was, and it's like, whoa,
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't realize that was
No,
a,
that's okay. That's why that's why.
It was literally like I hit one that was correspondence and it was like pages of the emails and I was like, wait a second.
Yeah, so those would be the two things. If we can test the bookmarks and see if that does work within OneDrive, or I don't know if we're allowed to download it. It seems like downloading is the same as having a paper copy, so probably we shouldn't be allowed to download it. So I'm guessing that's the
Anything that you
provisions.
could potentially keep, you
Yeah.
don't wanna retain copies.
Yeah,
We
I
don't
actually
want you
don't
to
want to retain, yeah.
copies.
No, I also don't want to retain copies. And then this, I mean, you took notes, I don't have to repeat myself, so there will be minutes, but this is great. Thank you. That is
You're very
helpful to
welcome.
me. Those were my questions. Does anybody else have questions or comments?
okay,
Okay, thanks.
very
Cindy.
welcome.
Okay. Oh, we're very late. That's my fault. Well, that is helpful to me. Hopefully it will take less of our time in the future because I now know what to do. Well, we are on to the case review. Allegations of, I can't even say the word, but capsicum aerosol. How do you say the
We'll
first
just
word?
call it OC
OC.
spray.
Oh, see. Oleoresin, oleoresin, like resin, but oleo, which is also known,
I've heard that.
say it again.
That's the first time I've ever.
Yeah, I also have not heard it pronounced. Also known as pepper spray, right? Is it inappropriate to use the term pepper spray? Is it not
No.
referred to as pepper spray? Yeah.
What it is.
Okay, so also known as pepper spray, case review for allegations related to that. And Rob, you are going to tell us about it?
Yep, so we are ready for our case summary. So our case review is an allegation regarding an OC spray deployment. So in May of 2024, Eugene Police Department officers conducted a patrol check in downtown and contacted an individual, the suspect, who was trespassing on a property. And no trespassing notices were displayed, and a current no trespassing letter was filed with Eugene PD for the location. So Officer E told the suspect he or she was sleeping in a no trespassing area, requested to see his or her hands, and requested he or she sit upright. Suspect denied he or she was trespassing and became argumentative with the officers. Officer A informed the suspect he or she was trespassing, was detained, and was subject to arrest. The suspect contested Officer A's assertions, refused to provide identification, said he or she was waiting for a bus, and challenged the officer's legitimacy as sworn members of Eugene PD.
Can I make a quick note just for clarity?
Yes.
The first note in the first bullet, no trespassing is one thing. It's not that there were not trespassing notices, it's that no trespassing notices were there, like notices of no trespassing were present. Just in case someone was confused.
No, yeah. So Officer A requested the suspect move from his or her location behind a bicycle rack. The suspect refused to cooperate with the commands. The suspect told the officers he or she had a bad tendency to resist law enforcement. Approximately 12 minutes after the contact began, Officer A deployed his or her OC spray to the suspect's face to gain compliance. After the OC spray deployment, Officer seized custody of the suspect, arrested him or her for resisting arrest and criminal trespassing, and transported him or her to the Lane County Jail. In Officer A's internal affairs interview, he or she acknowledged the suspect was not engaged in active resistance. Officer A explained his or her actions and stated he or she was concerned about the suspect's aggressive behavior, larger size, strength, location, and statements. Officer A stated if a physical altercation had occurred, he or she feared potential injuries for the officers and the suspect. So the allegation was 803.3 OC aerosol that Officer A used OC spray against a person engaged in passive resistance in violation of policy in May of 2024. And so for the single allegation, auditor recommended sustained, and chain of command and the chief within policy. So I'll shorten this part. So it was an auditor generated complaint. There's your relevant policy. And then the lieutenant captain and deputy chief were all in concurrence. And the chief concurred. And then here are the usual materials that we provided for y'all. And that is my last screen. I will stop sharing and let y'all take it away.
Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
All right, so we have general comments listed as the first thing that we will discuss. If that is okay with everyone. And Monique, do you want to start us off with general comments?
Yeah, I don't have any general comments.
Okay.
I don't think I do either.
Yeah, no comment.
Do you have any general comments, Rick?
You're not.
My one general comment is, can we pull up the policy 803.3 eventually to look at? Or- I can pull it up on my phone,
Sure.
but,
I'm always a little weird sharing my screen.
oh, yeah.
I mean, it's a nice background of the city, but still.
A lot of people don't like Clemson.
Yeah, well, that can be a longer term
Yeah, see, there's
thing
the-
that happens.
There's the.
Yeah, so while you're doing that, we'll move on to complaint intake, classification and monitoring. Just, yeah. Do you want to skip starting?
I don't think I have anything playing into classification. I'm fine with that. Was
Great.
generally classified, I thought that. Sufficient. That's cool.
Good.
I had in my notes written internal complaint and then heard whispering over here and now it's internal complaint, so just wanted to clarify that. Internal versus auditor generated.
I believe it was an internally identified complaint and that the overview said auditor initiated, so I just thought that is inaccurate.
That's what I read in the report also, so. I had the same question. Rick, any comments on intake, classification and monitoring?
I think it's appropriate to bring it up discuss it.
Great, yes, yes, I understood it to be an internal, driven complaint, generated complaint, excuse me. And, I guess the policy, so the classification is specifically about, I think the use of pepper spray, because that is the element that was questionable to the, yeah. We'll talk more about this, I think, in the policies, practices, and policy training, but I'm curious, like, were there other policy considerations that the auditor's office considered?
You mean like use of force or judgment?
Yeah,
Or you can-
something else that is not specific to,
De-escalation.
yeah,
something like
sure,
that. I mean,
yeah.
They took a significant amount of time talking to him, so we discussed it, but felt
Mhm.
like 12 minutes was.
There didn't appear to be a violation of
It
that.
wasn't like it happened within a minute or two, so, no. I mean, they tried, I mean, several officers engaged the suspect and efforts were made for sure. So that was the only one that we considered this active versus passive resistance.
Mhm. And just to like clarify that, if it wasn't clear to people who will watch or read this, or all the public who will be reviewing our work, the thing that I will talk about more and ask more questions about is what Rob just said, that there's a specific part of this policy, the three, where there's a description of passive resistance, and within the report, there's a sort of understanding that that is where the questions arise, is whether this person, suspect, was engaging in passive resistance, which means that you would not be allowed to use OC spray against a person engaged in passive resistance, and so that's sort of where the question arises for an investigation, and why it was classified this way, you're saying, Rob, right? Okay.
Yes.
Is there a date on this policy when it was passed? It should be like in the bottom.
Let me look at the bottom of it and see if
Down
it has.
down at the bottom.
Or the top.
Top left.
Yeah,
Says
so November
6/18.
16, 2018.
Yeah.
Mhm. And sorry, you also should comment on intake, that is all my comments for intake classification monitor. Do you have any comments?
I think it was sufficient. Yeah, I think that's it.
Great. So the next, this is great, this is up. The next section that we'll talk about is department policies, practices, and policy/training considerations. Brittany, would you like to start us off? Great.
As per usual, I just have a lot of questions. And I think it's helpful that you were asking that question. That helps refine the scope, Clay, as I'm thinking of this. My questions are probably more related to de-escalation strategies, but maybe can help me understand the outcomes here. So I was just curious if the 12-minute time frame is typical or seems long or more brief, or if there's any sense, or if that completely varies and there's no expected.
In any situation, particularly if you're dealing with somebody in crisis, which I would think this individual will classify there. There is no timeline. There's no expectation of timelines of anything. What we look at is, what are we saying versus what we're hearing? And in this case, we had 4 separate officers try to engage this guy in dialogue. And every single iteration, the individual talked over the officers, was not receptive. And any efforts, including from one of our crisis negotiators, to engage with this individual, to get him to a place where we could actually build rapport, which would be the first step in de-escalation, it wasn't gonna happen. And we think of, in the police world, we think of, in the black and white area, we have yes people. Those are people that are gonna do everything we say and they're good. We have no people, they're not gonna do anything we say and they're no good. And then there's the middle, the maybes. Our job is to get the people, the maybe, and maybe even the no people over to yes. This guy's no. He's no.
So one of the officers was from the crisis negotiation team.
Yeah, he's working patrol. He wasn't there as a crisis negotiator, but he is a crisis hostage negotiator. Yeah.
I think my other related question then, I think I'm remembering from a past case talk about officer discretion around engagement and like sustained engagement based on the risk to the public and the individual, something along those lines. So I guess I was curious, is it ever done or appropriate in this instance? You know, this gentleman and this person initially was asleep and not disturbing anyone, you know, violating trespass, which I see on a weekly basis in Eugene, right? And it seemed like, I think I remembered it being kind of the middle of the night. And I heard the officers walking up, you know, saying, we're just gonna help this person move along. So weren't looking to like pick a fight per se, but, and then also per the individual's report, they're already involved legally around trespass. They've already had this level of accountability, if you will, implemented that they were trying to pursue, if we're taking them at their word. So I guess I just wondered at the end of it, you know, person jarred awake, you know, immediately threatened because there's two cops standing over them. I'm not quite sure what the threat was, and then if I think long-term, like this is just kind of perpetuating, this is getting more philosophical, so I'm sorry, but perpetuating like this person getting stuck in this legal cycle, and it's like, is it appropriate to just give a warning and move on when you see the person's not engaging, but is also not coming to pose a risk to the public?
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Want me to keep going?
Go ahead.
Okay. Oh, there's a lot there, Rick.
Well, I
Okay.
like 6
So,
questions.
let's just make sure we stay on point a little bit,
Yeah.
because we're talking about some philosophical things
Yeah.
about our deployment strategies versus what happened in this particular situation. I can tell you, if we have a trespass letter of consent, that is a business telling us, we want you to come onto our premises, and if there's people there, we are requiring and we're demanding you make the arrest. So now, I will tell you in practice, and Sergeant Beckles can back this up for me with his teams. If we can get there and we can gain voluntary compliance and we can say, hey, can you move on so we don't have to, you know, deal with this? That's always ideal, right? In this situation, we didn't have that, and we didn't have that opportunity to actually say, hey, look, you know, can you move on? Because as soon as we started into that, and your point's well taken, when we start off a conversation with a abruptly awaken somebody. But I think this went a little bit further, because now we have the individual refusing to identify himself, and now he's telling us, I've been in the system before.
Yeah.
He clearly knows and understands rights and responsibilities if you're unhoused, because he articulated to the officers, I'm on a public easement, even though he was camping right beside no trespassing painted on the ground. So as you start to talk as a police officer, now I'm starting to think, okay, why aren't you wanting to give me your name? You've been in contact with the police. Is there a warrant? Is there something else going on? He's beginning to fish around with the bag. So and I'm throwing examples of, and I think Joel could say the same thing, of our experiences, is that my mindset would change a little bit in this to, okay, why are you deferring and deflecting so much away of what I'm trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
You said something that was really important to me, and hits near and dear to me, because I did come and provide the training on our pursuit policy, which talks about the need to apprehend versus the risk created in the community. And that was framed as pursuit, but it does apply to everything. I mean, we want to be harm reduction type strategies, the least impact that we have with individuals, the better off we are, while we're still trying to accomplish legitimate goals. So I think there's a lot to unpack there. Hopefully that kind of answered the philosophical piece and approach. I think there's more going on here than really we're seeing. There's more here. And I don't even think the primary officer in this, some of the things that I'm saying are things that you can watch in a body worn footage after the fact that are very nuanced, that experienced officers have seen a little bit of this, and they know younger officers are experiencing it, but they would not be able to come here before you and say, oh, this is what I'm seeing and thinking, although they're intrinsically picking it up. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for letting me go beyond our scope a little bit, but the background felt important. And one of my other questions had been, I wasn't quite sure on what initiated the engagement, but it's that letter of trespass, if I'm understanding, which is really helpful to understand. Yeah, I guess my last point, I think this, I read this in the auditor's report, but just the actual scope of what we're talking about, actual use of the pepper spray with the 5 officers versus the 1 individual. This isn't a question, but just a comment that felt like maybe there was less risk from that individual if you think about just the numbers. So, I think that's-
Thanks.
you.
Rick? Policies, practices, policy training considerations?
I just wonder, my concern was, that this policy was put in place. It struck me as a situation where we're trying to avoid having people just walked up and sprayed for no reason, just sitting in doing protest work or something. This guy was not protesting anything. He was just being obstreperous to me. I don't know what options the officers had at that point when they have a duty to arrest him under the circumstances, because the bank has put the police department on notice that they want these people arrested. And I'm wondering what, maybe I could ask Deputy Chief Wright about that. What feeling does the department have about being forced to arrest in that situation?
Well, I mean, that's our job and it's our duty, Rick. I mean, so I think in that regard, we all accept it, we all understand it, and that's just part of wearing the uniform. If I could continue just a little bit further, because you mentioned something, and I've heard it, and I'm just gonna jump ahead a little bit here, because as I'm adjudicating this and I'm looking at it, the question of whether we have passive resistance or active resistance is central to this event. And passive resistance, offers a scenario. We have individuals, we have a university here. We have people go out and sit on the commons, or they sit and block an entranceway, and they're not fighting, they're not articulating, I'm going to fight. They're just not gonna get out of our way, and they're not gonna do anything we say. And when you go to arrest them, they're not gonna physically resist, they're just going to go with the program. And in fact, many times, they wanna be arrested to make a point. That is the definition or the nature of what passive resistance is here. The individual we're dealing with in this event has intentionally barricaded himself into a corner of a building, and he tells the officers he's behind the bike rack to use that as a shield, so the officers or others can't get to him. So right off the get-go, he set himself up for active resistance. He's articulated to the officers, I'm going to fight, I'm angry, he's loud, he's boisterous. And there's nothing there about any of the de-escalation that they tried for more than 10 minutes verbally that would indicate that we're going to be successful. And so it becomes a decision point. Do I want to go into a constrained area or confined area to deal with somebody that has told me I'm going to fight, or he's shown, his behavior is targeting. He's looking at the officers. He's going back and forth to his bag. He's agitated. He's elevated. Now, come on, Sean. In part, that is because we are there and we're present, and it's a difficult situation. I get that. But these are all things we have to look at. But then the ultimate piece to this is when the officers say to the individual, scoot out from behind the bike rack, and he refuses their orders, they tell him you're under arrest, and he refuses their orders. This, as I'm adjudicating this is what takes it past passive resistance. And I'm gonna create a new term here tonight. It's passive plus. He's not actively resisting, but common sense tells you if I go and touch that guy, the fight is going to be on. And that's why you will find our adjudication there as within policy. So hopefully I preempted that a little bit, but I know in hearing what the conversations were and some of your concerns, which is the things that our chain of command looks at and the chief and I discussed. Just wanted to, well, I had an opportunity for that.
What was curious to me was his comment that I have the corner rule operating in my possession. I've never heard of that before. I've been practicing law for over 50 years in this community. I've never heard of the corner rule. Is there such a thing?
There is not such a thing.
I didn't think so.
Oh.
Okay. Sounded me more like more defense to me. That's all I have, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Rick. Well, I guess because the deputy chief took a little time to explain the reasoning of the chain of command and sort of how they felt like this was not a violation of policy, can you maybe describe the nuance that you see, Rob, about how passive resistance, how you define it, or like how you see this as violating that? portion of the
Sure, I
policy?
mean, for starters, the deputy chief did a significantly better job articulating the event than Officer A did.
Mm.
So Officer A didn't do a good job articulating active resistance, and based on the statements that he made, the body cam footage that we watched, and the way the policy is written, I felt that it violated policy. I mean, that's just plain and simple. So I also, I mean, in defense of Officer A, I wasn't there, and I do think it was very likely that he would have engaged them in a fight. But I also think that if I were to speculate, I think maybe like a more senior officer, if they were there, they might have made an effort to reach in and touch the suspect. Like instead of, okay, I think he's gonna fight based on position or movement, make an effort. There's 5 officers there. I think that would have been a likely outcome from other officers. So it's impossible to scrutinize because I wasn't there, but then again, it's kind of what we do. But yeah, my opinion based on the video, the interview with Officer A, and the way the policy is written, is just he violated the policy.
Great, thank you. I guess my other sort of follow-up question, and this could be for anyone, but most likely probably would be if you can answer this, is in sort of the progression of use of force, does it make sense to sort of use pepper spray to prevent using hands-on if you think that hands-on is going to be more destructive? Like, I'm not sure where the hierarchy is between the two in terms of impact.
I don't know if they know the continuum of the use of force. That might be something interesting for you to touch on for the room. Sorry to put you on the spot, but.
Oh, he's standing up.
Watch this.
It could, because we discussed this a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
This is not Maslow's hierarchy of needs for you scholars. So, apologize for my rudimentary drawing here. So when we talk about a force continuum, it's shaped like a pyramid like this. And basically what you have at the bottom is your presence and your verbal skills. The next level would be hand-to-hand or non-custodial touching, OC or baton, taser, and then finally your firearm. The continuum or the triangle is shaped this way because at the bottom, at the base of the triangle, is the essence of really what found the foundation for the triangle, and that presence and verbal skills are the thing that we use most in our bread and butter. And then as you go climb the ladder or the pyramid higher, you can see it'll point off. So less hand-to-hand, less OC baton, less taser, and less firearm. So, but as I show this, let me show you something else.
Hopefully you can see this, Rick. Can you? Probably not.
No,
The pyramid being drawn.
I'm imagining based on what his description, I can pick it up pretty well though. Thank you.
So just a little bit, a little bit about use of force and how we teach and how we train it. So what you see on the right now is what's called a force wheel. This over here is great for us to conceptualize how officers use police or force, because it tells you how the ladder and the pyramid and everything works. However, what we found in litigation is smart attorneys will come in and they'll go, well, Officer A, why is it that you showed up on scene and immediately shot my client instead of trying all these techniques? Well, your client pulled a gun out and shot at me. Well, wait a minute, doesn't your force continuum say you have to do this? So there has to be a little bit of understanding of how the force continuum works and how it can be used against us as police officers. But the more conceptual thing for us to work on and teach is the force wheel. So at any given moment as an officer, I'm in the middle of the wheel and I'm out engaging with the public. I can reach out and I can use and grab any tool that I need. So it's a little bit more conceptual for us because I could go from, hi, how you doing? An individual, let's say, pulls a knife, for example, and I could be pointing a gun at him. And you know, it's a little bit easier for us to conceptualize. If you're middle on the wheel, you can really use any tool at any time. But you have to be able to justify that use of the tool. And remember what we've talked about previous, that justification has to be the reasonableness standard. Would another officer of similar experience do the same thing? Is it reasonable under the circumstances? So we teach both of these, and like I said, this is the primary thing that law enforcement has used probably since Sir Robert Peel in 1812. I mean, since the dawn of time, this force continuum is tried and proven. The force wheel is just something that's become a little bit more contemporary recently, and it kind of helps us when we're teaching also to conceptualize for our officers. So hopefully this helps, and I don't even remember what the question was, how we got going, but hopefully that helps answer whatever that was.
Yeah, well, what I've understood like today, but then also previously is that, you know, you want to use the force that is responding to the situation at hand to gain control and affect whatever outcome you need to affect as an officer, and that it needs to be justifiable based on policy. And so I guess my question would be, why wouldn't hands-on be the first thing that you would try? And that, even though it's not meant to be a progression from presence up to OC with hands-on being in the middle, but that is another tool that can be used. So why, I guess, why wouldn't that be the tool that we would? I know the judgment of this officer in that situation can't be based on that, but I'm just curious about that sort of question.
Well,
Question.
yeah, and like, this is a great topic for discussion, and I'm just gonna speak from me. If I'm in the same circumstances and I'm looking at the same thing. Yeah, I'm gonna wanna go hands-on for sure, because I don't wanna use OC spray, and I'll tell you, that's because I hate the stuff, and I've been sprayed multiple times with it, and by the way, my ratio is you can taser me 3 times to 1 OC spray, that's how much I hate it. But the problem with this, and the game changer of this whole thing is, not necessarily his demeanor or the aggressive nature of his discussion, it's the bike rack. Because to get in there, and it doesn't matter how many officers we have there, at best, you're gonna be able to get 2 into that confined space with him because of that bike rack. And that's why the officers were trying to get him to come out, because then you could use the number of officers that you had on scene to your advantage. So the bike rack's a game changer. You can't reach over the bike rack to get him. You have to be up close where you can grab that individual and be able to manipulate them. And so as I look at this and I review it, and I know where this corner is. And I would not feel comfortable trying to get up and use hands-on in that technique. The only other viable alternative that I would see in this situation is to try to continue to de-escalate this, to lower the temperature. The way he kept talking over all the officers on scene, I just don't think you're gonna get there. So that's.
Okay,
my
great.
thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. I do not have additional comments in this section. Policies, practices.
Yeah, I think
Training.
the policy is good. I'm glad it's there. I'm surprised it's from 2018. Is there like a case? Some kind of case law requirement that's in there, or is that just a progressive move from the department?
As far as.
Not to have to train someone who's passive.
No, that's progressive, and I think that's pretty progressive or pretty commonplace for most of your agencies. Particularly after 2020, when we saw George Floyd, but we're aware of some pretty egregious times in law enforcement history where pepper spray has been used pretty judiciously and in ways and means that would be considered certainly inappropriate, if not assaultive, so.
Okay, wonderful. So I think policy's great, training probably, I'm thinking back to when we did a mini training on pepper spray. A lot of what we talked about was like the technique and how do we make sure we get it in someone's eyes. And I don't remember talking about like what instances in which we don't use it, but I assume officers are getting that training.
Yes.
Okay,
So just to speak a little bit on the training piece, since I seem to be talking a lot here today, but here's the one training piece of this that I think we failed on is that we pepper sprayed the individual and we immediately went in there and went hands-on with 2 officers. Ideally, what we want to do is put the pepper spray into that situation and then tell the individual, come out to us and we're going to help you and we'll do the things that we need to do after the fact. So if looking at it, Monday morning quarterbacking, I think we should have just put the pepper spray in there and then got the individual to come to us because the same situation, we ended up in a physical confrontation with him where I think we could have avoided that eventually. Had we just said, hey, look, you know, it's terrible, we know it burns, come on out, we'll spray you with some water and help you out. Maybe we can end better.
awesome. Good to hear that you have a training issue in mind. I want to talk about passive resistance. You were kind of defining it. At one point you called it passive plus. I know that is not a technical term, but I want to understand more about what passive resistance or what the department would consider passive resistance.
Mhm.
So, would somebody who is not just like, okay, so is the standard that somebody's limp or is it that they're not complying? So if somebody's not giving you your arms, is that passive resistance?
Passive resistance up to a point. So if you tell an individual you're under arrest, put your hand behind your back and they physically resist, you're potentially getting into active resistance. So that's gonna have to be determined based on the whole totality of the situation with the officers, what they're saying, what's the level of force that's being used. To get the arms out, for example, in your scenario, so. Limp's a great example, that's what we see most commonly, people just will not just. And then you have to physically manipulate them. We will see individuals in protester devices, for example, where they're sleeping dragons, where they chain themselves into protester devices and won't release, that's passive resistance, that's not active resistance. What takes it a little bit higher is that after you're cued and you say, hey, give me your arms, stop resisting me, you're under arrest. Now you're starting to transcend into active resistance. So hopefully that kind of answers that for you.
Yeah, well, and I think some of it just has to be played out on an individual basis. So, if somebody's passive resisting, they're not giving their hands, and they're not, let's say, you had said the changing factor here was that they were in a bike rack. So let's assume they were just out in the open. Would it have been appropriate to use OC then?
So make sure I understand what you're saying. So the individual does not have the bike rack there and they're in the corner.
Yeah.
And they're still exhibiting the same things.
Well,
that we're
no
talking
corner,
about.
they're just.
It's down the middle of
Yeah.
nowhere.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's gonna be situational. I mean, if the individual's still saying to me, hey, I'm gonna fight, I'm not gonna go along with the program, takes a fighting stance. Does some of the things we saw from him, the targeting behavior where you're looking around, you're looking at officers. We may get to a point where we would utilize pepper spray. I don't think so. But that's pretty hard to give a definitive because it's so situationally based.
That's all. And that's all I have. That's all I think.
No,
All these questions. I don't think I have a lot that hasn't been covered. I appreciate the policy, I think. And I don't have the entire EPD policy handbook in front of me to read through, that there should be a bit more definition, like where it says, are going to by any active or physical resistance. I'm not sure if they're saying active or if they mean active to mean physical, but that's just a textualist clarification issue. The general commentary, nothing that has been said. I appreciate your drawings. I'm a very visual learner, by the way.
Okay, good.
But yeah, for the most part, I think everything that's been said that I could add.
thank you. That concludes this round. The last right, you commented on policy. Yeah, you were the first. Great. Rick, would you start us off with reviewing the adjudication and your thoughts?
Yeah, my view is I think that the officers act within policy and I think that they tried just about everything they could to talk him out of it and talk him into just voluntarily moving, doing something other than protesting behind the bike rack. They had the one person who was trying to be a nice person and talk to the subject about where he was from and whether he grew up there or how long he'd been in the area, that type of thing, trying to break the ice a little bit. They tried that. And the officer who actually used the pepper spray then tried to be the hard guy and say, "Now I want you out of there, get out of there, move sideways." And it didn't work. I just don't think they were going to make any headway with this fellow. It was over 10 minutes, and it was a painfully long 10 minutes to me that they had to sit there and listen to him, berate them. It seemed to me a longer period of time than actually 10 minutes. So that was a test for me. To me, they had no other choice. I don't see what other possible way they could have resolved the situation other than to do what they did. I mean, you had the option of using a taser, which is, you're gonna get the same type of reaction from that, from the public or from people who are gonna complain about it. So to me, it was the best of the lowest level of interference with this guy's freedom of movement. So that's all I have.
I will say I reluctantly agree with Rick. The thing that I'm like sort of understanding is that it seemed to the officer who ended up using a level of force that force was needed to gain compliance and that compliance was needed to sort of do their job. And that this was the moment at which they decided that that was necessary to use force, and they used a level of force that is sort of part of their toolkit to use. And the description that the deputy chief gave, yes, makes me feel like that is within policy. While I recognize like that might not be the same description that the officer involved would have used, and so I sort of see where the auditor's office came in thinking that this is not within policy. I think it's a fine line, and I'm on slightly on the within policy side of that line.
Well, I understand the reluctance to agree. I was feeling that way, but ultimately, I think just based on the information we had in the file and that the officer gave us, that are we supposed to vote now?
We can just describe, and
Yeah.
I think the voting is happening regardless. There's only one allegation, and so it's easier to just vote if you'd like to.
Yeah, so I think just given the information that was in the file that the officer gave, that it seems that the allegation should have been sustained.
Well, I will base this based on just a plain textualist reading of the policy. I think it should be sustained. That does not mean I don't hear why, and I fully understand. I get it. But it's written that way for a specific reason. I think if they had attempted a hands approach and gotten a more active response, it would have justified it. But this is also slightly cleared and coupled with the fact that the officer had threatened to use it at multiple points prior as well, which going to the point of de-escalation, threatening to spray someone with OC, and then you have someone come in. And I don't think the negotiator knew that they had at that point. They set themselves up for a confrontation by that way by acting aggressively or threatening at first, I feel. So on strict basis of the text, I would sustain it. I actually heard.
Two things that stuck out to me. One is on the body worn footage, it actually seemed, and I don't know if I was there, it actually seemed like he was making a move to move away from the bike rack at like the last second. And I couldn't tell exactly when the spray was dispensed to know if the spray got him there or not. But it did actually look like he was possibly coming around. And I also felt like, I'm wondering if it's the crisis negotiator, but the officer that I think Rick's referencing was making some headway, and it seemed like the aggression was really specifically focused on Officer A. And so I think that there could have been continued efforts of de-escalation with some of the other officers in the rapport building strategy, so with those sustained as well.
So to recap, Rick said within policy, as did I, and then the three of you said sustained. As recommendations. Okay, well, that concludes that section of the agenda. Thank you all. And we'll have time for closing comments if we have additional comments to make. And we do have the auditor's report on the agenda. We're a little behind, so if there's a condensed version of the auditor's report that we.
As always, in your newsletter, it says the Strength and Neurodiversity Fair is on Friday, March 18th. That doesn't exist till, I'm not sure what year. It should be actually Friday, this Friday, March 14th, right?
Yeah.
At Shelton High School. So if you get a chance to go out there, from 5 to 7, we'll be tabling as will other city agencies. Said it before, as Beatrice does an extraordinary job of interacting with groups and cultures in our community. I refer to her as the ambassador to the Latino community for the city of Eugene and other parts of the community, and can't even articulate adequately the value that provides not only our office, but the city government. So this is just another one of the things that she does. The CRB, they have gotten, we had a subcommittee, they've gotten the votes on the subcommittee. And I don't know when they're gonna choose. If you are an applicant, you may be, they may request to interview you. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So they have not announced any appointments yet. I don't know, it might be later this month where they get together and have that discussion, but I'm not real sure. That they have the budget issue, which is probably the primary issue they're dealing with. And now they have another issue because the city manager just announced that she's leaving in December. So they have a lot of things to do. In terms of the auditor interview, some of you already know, so the 13th and 14th. Right now, 4 people are scheduled to be interviewed. Different groups, there's the community sort of oriented group, there's what's called the stakeholder group, which includes me, the union president, someone from EPD. Are you guys? No, you're another one. And I'm drawing like some people from HR, maybe another department. There's that group, and then there's council, so the candidates will be in town for a couple days for all those interviews. I don't know what the decision-making process is. I don't know if I should guess or not. I'm guessing they'll probably send 2 to background. Just in case the one they like best chooses not to come. If they don't live here. I don't even know where they're from. That's about all I can know. I can speculate a whole bunch. I've been around a few times. Oh, so, I can't, I don't even have the words to say about Cindy and how she has helped our office grow. It's just beyond exceptional, beyond extraordinary, professional, every single interaction we've ever had with her. Have you been an IA 30 years?
24.
24. So it's gonna be interesting. You take her 24 years, my 14, that's 38 here, another 15 in Cincinnati and with DOJ and everything else. So and then Vicky leaving in her 17 years. So you're probably looking at about, oh, Rick, yeah, 10 years. You're looking at 80 some years of experience and oversight and about 60 years, give or take, in Eugene, and these sort of administrative investigations of police officers. So it's certainly gonna be significant changes, but, just like the iPro system, our database system, just, Cindy just took it and ran with it and is, an expert at it. There's things in that system that, if you give her a score of 100 for knowing the system, I don't know of anyone else who would be at 50. Because it's just a really vast system of information and things, and she's always just dialed right into it, and among all the other things, so. Thank you for making my job so much easier. And for always being the commensurate professional in all that you do. And partly I'm kind of glad I'm leaving too, because with her gone, it's just gonna be a heavy lift for all of you. I'm probably second or on the iPro system, maybe, or perhaps some of my staff members, but it's our database system. It's a great system, but it's complicated. So again, thank you so much.
Great.
Yes.
Question for the board and staff. Starting date, estimated time of arrival for the new auditor.
I suspect, if they drill down by the middle of this month, but I kind of expect. Then they'll start the background. The background will be probably 4 to 6 weeks, depending on who gets assigned the background. And, negotiate contracts and things like that. Optimistically, I would think sometime in May. But I'm here for the following month, so I'll have those more discussions with them. I'll know by the end of the month whether I'll probably know in the next couple of weeks. Where they've really dialed in and how many people they've dialed in. But yeah, I would think I'm surprised if we get the middle of May. So, but again, it just depends on. You're at the mercy of the background investigators at that point in time, so. And then the negotiating process after that, which actually shouldn't be that difficult.
You said around May,
And again, it's just pure speculation,
and you are here until,
April 25th.
so are you going to stay
No,
in between?
no,
What is the plan for those?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
I haven't had that discussion with council leadership. I will by the end of this month, so. Sure, we'll have an interim staff person, so.
Beatrice does a great job. Beatrice, for all of them.
Acting in capacity.
Lindsay,
Yeah.
do a fabulous job.
Well, all three of them would be great, so.
And these prospective auditors, background and oversight.
I don't know. I don't even know what people are. I
They
won't-
might have more for you.
Yeah, after Thursday,
Yeah.
we'll have a report.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll know after Thursday. But till then, I can guess. I still have a lot of contacts in the nation. So I have some guesses, but again, going through an interview process and accepting a position, particularly if you're not local, are two completely different things. So probably some of you already know, so. Because I think in my process in 2008, I was actually the show pony. I finished third. But the first person went to New Orleans. The second, and she was from LA. The second person was the auditor in Salt Lake City, Utah at the time. And preferred the culture of Salt Lake City versus the culture of Eugene. So that they invited the show pony. After the other two disqualified, so I was here a while. But so again, you just you still just never know,
Right.
And I think my background, once they decided, my background goes pretty quick because I don't have a lot of baggage.
Great, well, hopefully we'll learn more as the process progresses.
Yeah, I think, I think, the next meeting in April. Should be what, 13, 14, something like that. What's today?
It's the 8th, I think, of April. It's so
Eighth.
funny.
Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, that is the second Tuesday, so, yeah.
Yep. April one.
So up plenty of notes, but even then, again, you go to the background, I'm certain they won't have the background done by the 8th of April.
Mhm.
And then again, we gotta move to the offer thing, so.
Right. Great, well, thanks, Mark.
Mhm.
Is there public?
We
Who
have
would like-
one person I don't recommend, so please, or I don't
Recognize.
recognize. Sorry.
If any members who are of the public who want to comment could raise their hand virtually, we can allow you to come onto video or audio to do so.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing none, we will move past public comment to closing comments. Would you like to go first, Moni?
I'm sure. So just a reminder, we're gonna be doing some kind of event with the potential auditors. You have brought to my mind to maybe ask about what the process is, because I might not ask any questions at all. We don't know how that's gonna go, but I look forward to seeing the potential auditors and reporting back about how that went. If you have anything in mind, we can talk offline, and that's it.
Oh, and if I may,
Yeah.
historically, and I think in this process, we get canned questions. So we're not gonna be permitted to improvise questions. So all the candidates will know, I think, in advance what the questions that they have written.
Okay.
HR has written for the candidates and how they respond.
Mhm. I'm just might be showing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I also may, because you probably don't know this, if you take notes, it's a public record. So I wouldn't call it a warning necessarily, but certainly
Awareness.
consider what you write down, because whatever you write down is public record in terms of your evaluation.
Noted. Thank you.
No problem.
I just wanted to thank you both for your, being present and representing EPD well and, continually being a reminder of like the human side of law enforcement, which I think is valuable to me and really important right now. And just the acknowledgement that I feel like as a citizen here, I'm looking to be really critical of the situation, and trying to consider every angle and, so value how you all flavor that, the reality of how it is.
Rick, closing comments?
No final comments. Thank you.
I will, yes, also say thank you. First of all, to Cindy for all the work that you've done over the years, and congratulations on retirement, because you won't be here next month, so we will miss you and the contributions that you've made to this process, but obviously it'll be hard to do this work without you, and but you shouldn't think about that in your future. You should just go off into the sunset and have a great time.
Just telling me she's gonna join virtually next year.
Oh.
We won't expect that. I think you'll be in a different country, maybe. Yeah, that's right. So thank you for everything. Yeah. And Sergeant Pecos, you did the investigation, is that right? Yeah, so thanks. We did comment briefly on it, but it was thorough and super helpful. And so thank you for the good work, continued good work. Like, it's helpful for us as citizens to see that that's happening in a really diligent way. I'll also say it's affirming to have like an incident like this be internally generated, because obviously someone in the police department also thought like, oh, we should look at that, at least we should investigate it and make sure that that is a use of force, that it's within policy. And while the outcome from the police department says it's within policy, and the outcome from the auditor's office review of that says it's a sustained violation of policy, I think the investigation process tries to get at the nuance of using force in these very difficult circumstances that officers find themselves in and that our community faces day to day. And while I have some similar concerns that Brittany articulated earlier about how we use force to deal with these public and community issues that are very complex and continual, there's lots of people sleeping in doorways and on private property. That is not necessarily the specifics that we're able to look at in every case. And I do really appreciate the resources that are going into reviewing these very nuanced situations. So it is
And if
something
I
that our
may,
community should.
because I think someone touched on the whole policy. It's the 50-50 dilemma, and unfortunately, the police officers are often the catch basin for that. No, it's like 50% of the population thinks that they're, that the city is being too aggressive on unhoused people and enforcement and criminal trespassing, and 50% of the city doesn't think they're doing enough. And ultimately, they have to just follow what the law is. You hear all these things on slashing tents on social media, and I even, did an interview, and again, we get to watch all the body worn and things like that. And again, it's just a real dilemma for the police officers, because that's not what they signed up for. When they went to recruit class and things like that, it's like, we're gonna arrest rapists, robbers, murderers, and we're gonna help people, and all we're dealing with is unhoused individuals who are less than pleased when they're contacted by the police. And so that is a philosophical question for the policymakers, but we hear about it far too often. They hear about it far too often. You have 4 full-time officers dedicated just to that issue, correct? 3, yeah, okay. Good, I'm glad they didn't quote me in the news on it. And so, again, at some point in time, hopefully the city can move in one direction or the other, instead of the ultimate dilemma for the politicians, which is the 50-50 issue. And, but again, I think for the most part, the work they do is very admirable and sympathetic to the needs of the vast majority of the unhoused population. So, but yeah, we have that policy discussion all the time. We spend, you're from Portland, literally spends 400 million a year on unhoused issues, and Eugene spends over $100 million a year on unhoused issues primarily. And would anyone say the system's better after a $1 billion investment over 10 years? Or in Portland, every 2.5 years, $1 billion investment in primarily unhoused issues. I don't know what the answer is, but I to think that the city's not trying to make things better, I think is an unfair characterization.
Well, with that,
My little speech.
yeah, soapbox removed, and now we will adjourn. Thank you, Auditor, for your comments.